Hello and welcome to a bonus segment for the Ascendant Art Podcast. This is Mike with Catalytic Comics hosting and giving the speech today. So I'll tell you what, in episode 11 of our podcast, we took on the Mother of Madness, and with an equally mad premise of could we take what has become a famously bad story as discussed around the internet, and can we turn it into something that's actually good just by using good storytelling? So this bonus episode, I am going to delve into the particulars of what we talked about, right? Focus on just the story element, and then along the way, I realized too that there actually is a decent story that could be told, but we are going to tell it in a little bit different format by pulling out some of the constraints that we had in the episode because we wanted to write a good story, not an agenda-driven story. So, with that in mind, one of the first questions is why do this? So the reason I did this is in the same way that in our very first episode we looked at Hawkeye and MCU. Well, it's because for some of our team, right, these guys grew up with classic stories and they knew Hawkeye growing up. And the idea that they're going to take that childhood memory and just diss it, right, was something we wanted to talk about. The last episode, episode 10, when we talked about Cowboy Bebop, again, many fond memories of what is a classic anime just being trashed by Netflix. So again, we just had to talk about, one, how bad it is and what really should have been done. And with that one in mind, the reason Mother of Madness hit me personally is because after reading the introduction, she says she's a chemical engineer, and they show scientist-like things in the comic. And as a chemie PhD myself, there is something in our discipline that we call disaster analysis, in which anytime someone does something incredibly stupid and blows themselves or others up, or causes any number of other accidents, we want to go back and study how it happened because we don't want it to happen again. And that can be said on a number of levels here, because I'll tell you what, my impression coming away from this book is it mocks science. It actually mocks women, and especially women in STEM. It's just so contrary to the experiences I had in graduate school. And when I think about STEM outreach programs, including programs to get more women interested in STEM, right? Again, it's just a mockery of all of it. So this one actually found all of my fond memories that had nothing to do with entertainment, and it hit at them. And then finally, it's also just mockery of the medium of comics. So because I'm trying to learn how to be a comics writer and director, I thought, hey, why not have a good writing exercise, do an analysis on what is a human disaster? Because believe it or not, there are actually people who got influenced by this and became fans. I don't know how, but it happened. That is a human disaster, and we need to pick that apart and make sure it never happens again. The way we're going to do it is we're going to do a quick recap of some stuff out of the original, right? Learning things not to do. Now I'm going to take the constraints on the story, right? We're going to take the same agenda, same character, and we're going to write a new story out of it. But then after I did that, I found out there actually is a decent story that could be told along this general theme of like a female chemical engineer. We're going to drop everything else, and then we're going to do the story I would really want to tell if I was telling it in this area. So let's do it. All right, so the original comic. So there are a few things I'm learning to look for in a comic, and the first one we're going to talk about is the character presentation. So this is the main character, Maya, I guess, Kuiper, Kuyper. I'd have to study that pronunciation. But regardless, these are scenes out of the intro. This is the famous intro speech that everyone goes nuts about, right? This one happens a little bit later, where she's like manifesting her powers for the first time. And I don't know, I presented this to some other people, and their first thought is this is a villain. Like, why is it heroic? So this is one thing to pay attention to as far as the presentation goes, because it's clearly a competent artist, but there are just certain elements, from the abilities to the glowing eyes to the way she talks to the way they drew this hair, that all of it just screams like something's not right, right? So one thing to keep in mind. The other thing, which again there are plenty of review videos about this, but this book is famous for having its totally incoherent dialogue, and this is everything from this one over here, where even though this is drawn in a technically correct way, because you can kind of, for the most part, the conversation does flow along this arrangement of speech bubbles. So you, but the thing is, like, okay, yeah, so these two characters are talking to each other. Man, that's Boone, my angel, my Aphrodite. Nobody talks like that. But anyway, so, but yeah, they have a conversation. You go down. Billy, I brought dinosaur stickers. Thank you, Jessica. Probably the only coherent conversation in this whole panel, this whole page. And then, yeah, but then these other ones, you read them in order, and they're not talking to each other. They're just making statements into the void that have no context to anything anyone else is saying. The other kind of funny thing too is when it comes to agenda writing, um, I don't know why. Like I remember going to China once, and in the capital, there's this like really big comic book store. And the first book I saw there was a philosophy book, and it actually had this quote on it. So it's like I don't know. I associate what this guy is saying with with that first experience of like, man, like what are the books the CCP pushes? And there it is. But anyway, let's continue with our story. Right? Same thing here. And again, artistic presentation, because why is this guy talking to this woman like this? And who is this guy? Is like, is this her husband who's just standing there taking it? He's drawn kind of young. Is it her son? Because he's also kind of disheveled here. But if it's the son, why is his arm around her? Again, like this panel just all it does is communicate confusion. Guys in the back, that should be a separate panel if you're going to do that kind of ambiance. But again, right? Incoherent dialogue, confusing presentation, and then here was an action panel that was actually could have been good, but then in the middle they have her like break wind, and then the guy's talking about what it smells like, and it's just confusing. So that's something we want to avoid. But the other thing here, and then we'll talk about this as we kind of do our reconstruction, is there is a lot of tell instead of show. And so you can reveal details in certain ways at certain times to make a compelling story. But in this case, you have just this long exposition dump. And one of the things I looked at was especially this circle up here, but all of these kind of do this. These are not really a description of the character, they're signal words. And this was from our main podcast. Joey pointed this out so well that when she says single mom and high school dropout, she had a tough early life. That makes her strong and street smart. Combine that with this first part that they're in an art museum in New York City. That, oh, look, like I'm in this high society place, but really I'm this like super down to earth high school dropout single mom. Right? Then chemical engineer is, oh, I'm smart. Part-time sex worker apparently means sexy and confident. Thai food junkie means I'm cultured. And again, because she's here, she's cultured. Biological freak of nature must mean interesting, I guess. The reference to the Ruth Bader Ginsburg speeches is, oh, like I'm smart and moral. Then all this stuff here is, look at me, I'm down to earth and relatable. Undertale, talented and relatable. So it's really, you could rewrite these bubbles as, hi, my name is Maya. I am strong. I am smart. I am sexy. I am cultured. I'm interesting. Right? Like, if you decode it, like, that's all she's saying. And it's like, dude, like, don't tell us that's what you are. Show us. So these were the major issues for the original. And as we do our rewrite, because we're not going to write a lot of dialogue, this will be the hardest one to address. But these will be things we will keep in mind, and we will look for some possible dialogue as we do our remake. All right, now the remake. So we've got the constraints on what the story is. So I've got the character. So we take that same intro panel. I'm going to, again, take everything out of this bubble because why not? I'll take the Ruth Bader Ginsburg speeches and Martha Stewart living, even though it's 2049. It'll be weirdly anachronistic in that sense. And we'll do the Undertale thing too, right? Now for theme, why not? Female empowerment. It's a feminist book. We'll write a feminist book. I wouldn't write it myself, but that's what we're doing. And then finally, we also have the relationship where she has this girlfriend, and we're gonna play with the occupations. But okay, so right, somebody who's like this, who has this relationship, and we're going to keep a feminist slash female empowerment theme mainly. So those are our constraints. So now let's build a character, okay? So instead of just using those things as statements to say I am smart, I am interesting, we're going to give an actual backstory that makes those properties relevant. The other part too is I went around looking for art of this character. There was one actually decent alternative cover, which is this one right here. So we're going to use this as her presentation because that actually looks decent. All right, so backstory. So the reason she is a single mom high school dropout is because she grew up in Houston, Texas. She had a super conservative family. They just limit her so much, and in some act of rebellion she falls pregnant and she runs away. And now we get to, okay, we've got the single mom and the high school dropout and kind of the feminist motivation already. So right, so we have a at least somewhat tragic backstory that introduces some family issues, and as we'll get into later, a core wound and some conflict for character growth, because hey, you need that for a story. And because that life is kind of hard, she starts getting a job near refineries, maybe a gas station or something. Then she's like, man, like, this is awful, but the guys like going through this convenience store seem to be doing much better. What do they do? She's like, okay, I get a refinery job. So she goes, gets her GED, gets her associate's, technical degree maybe, and she's getting a refinery job. So now we've got the transition to chemical engineering. So she's constantly working on herself. So she has some positive qualities now, that even though she was super rebellious, even though she got herself in all this trouble, she's willing to fight to come out ahead. So we now have some positive qualities. And while she's doing the refinery work, she learns now about the guys working on the rigs, right? The oil rigs. And she does this to say, hey, this is my ticket to just get out of this entire area of my life that I don't like anyway. And she's like, I can go to somewhere cool and exotic, which is Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. That's up in the Arctic Circle. And she's going to work as a safety engineer. All right. And again, we're going to now introduce some conflict, some story through that. What she does up there. That's going to be where the story takes place. Now for goals, maybe since she was young, she wanted to get out of her particular life and context in maybe a small town outside of Houston, Texas. And she's like, I want to go to New York. I want to be a world traveler, right? Like she has this idea of, say, a glamorous lifestyle, and maybe from her rig work, she's actually doing it. Now she wants to make as much money as possible to make the dream happen, to do the New York thing, do the world traveler thing, and eat exotic food because, hey, one of the constraints was a Thai food junkie, so there we go. Now she can go have Thai food in Thailand. So these are her goals. And guess what? So what do we got now? We've got, we got 29 years old. We got single mom. We've got high school dropout. We've got chemical engineer. Okay, the last one we're missing is part-time sex worker, but out of the goals, make as much money as possible. So you go to a place that is mostly guys north of the Arctic Circle, right? There you go. Now she's got some part-time work on the side that basically doubles her salary, which was already really great. So we've hit all of the constraints. But the thing is, we didn't have to have her say any of these, right? We can present all of those in the story as stuff that she does. So there we go. We can show instead of tell. So we've got backstory, we've got goals, but now to really make this interesting, we need character conflict and issues and growth. So her core wound is she hates her family back home. She hasn't forgiven her parents. She doesn't think they'll forgive her. And a great deal of her motivation is kind of this continued rebellion against her parents. She's going to succeed by her definition, and that success in her mind is also a constant middle finger to whatever it was that her parents were pushing her to do back then. Now, this gives itself to some likely flaws, so she can be proud. She can be a big thrill seeker, which means she takes unnecessary risks, which, again, as a safety engineer, right, that's a problem. And she kind of sees the work and the stuff she's doing as the answer. So doing work in pursuit of these goals is the answer. Now, what this does is it sets up the stage for using these as a way to introduce certain key characters as either getting in the way or enabling it as a conflict and as a driver. So now we have the support characters. Now we took the girlfriend and we're going to make her the caretaker of that child, because remember, she's a single mom and she's got to go work on these rigs, which means, you know, she's out there quite a bit and away from her kid. So this lady's going to take care of Maya's kids, practically the mother while May is practically dead. That could be some interesting dialogue that we kind of say, hey, maybe they're in a relationship, maybe they're not, because they bicker like people who've been married about 4 years, which is kind of the difficult stage in a lot of marriages. And we could totally come up with a line about, like, I'm practically this kid's mother and you're the deadbeat dad that only shows up once a month, right? You could do something along those lines. So in this case, right, like, they're tied to each other, and yet at the same time they're conflicted because narratively this lady is there to point out some of Maya's flaws. So she can be the adult voice for what the child is also going to be, because the child wants more time with mom, and the child may also want some things other than the science and engineering that the mom did. But again, in the same way that Maya is upset at her parents wanting different things for her life than she wanted, well, guess what? She wants different things for her kid than her kid wants. So now that conflict could be told through both a child voice and an adult voice through these two. Because she works on the rigs, right, there are going to be plenty of males out on the rigs too. So there's a stereotype of this kind of guy called the rig pig. They go out there, earn a ton of money doing this hard work, then they go back, spend it all on fast living. Because it's a feminist story, we're not going to write anyone else. We're only going to keep the stereotype. I wouldn't do it, but hey, it's a constraint. Constraints limit the story. Agenda-driven constraints really wreck the story. We're doing it. But we will put one nice person on there, and this is going to be a sage. And what'll happen is, for whatever reason, May is a little bit nicer to him. They pick on each other. But now, again, narratively, he's going to talk to this. He's going to talk to the core wound, the major flaws, right? He's going to challenge her goals, but in a way that is kind of fun. Finally, we've got the evil CEO with his agenda. We'll talk more about him when we get to his part of the story. So you see, we've got a character now. And guess what? We've got a character who is a 29-year-old single mom, high school dropout, chemical engineer, part-time sex worker, Thai food junkie, and biological freak of nature, but without having to write that bubble. Right? We can make an actual story, guys. Come on. All right, cool. Now for the actual story, let's do just the hero's journey, because, right, it's a simple and effective story construction, so we'll do it. So we're going to start Maya off in Prudhoe Bay, and, right, she's going to be sassy. She can push back against the guys, and in fact, to do the part-time sex work, but then also do the feminism, maybe a guy comes up and asks her about a volume discount, and she's like, you know what? All right, you can just kiss my ass in front of all the other guys here on the rig, and you can pay me 80%. And you can imagine the other guys then all start pushing around. It's like, come on, do it, Jimmy. And just totally embarrasses this guy, totally wrecks him, right? That would be a a great explanation of, oh, guess what? This is a lady who's actually tough, actually does everything that we intended her to do. And we can show that. We can show the thing about the deal with the caretaker and the son, as she basically stops with them briefly before she flies off to wherever she wants to do her next eating exotic food thing. And right, there you go. That is kind of where we're setting her up. Now, at the same time, because she's got all of these little conflicts, she's kind of in this stage where things are starting to stall a little bit, and she's wondering what to do next. This is where the supernatural aid comes in. We're going to put her on top of a flare tower inspecting. But because we're above the Arctic Circle, right, you get these northern lights, the auroras. Well, maybe one of them just reaches down and, almost like the hand of God, touches her on the tower. And being bathed in all that exotic radiation gives superpowers, because why not? It works for so many others. Now, as she comes off of that experience, I said earlier about how she totally embarrasses this guy. Well, maybe it's nighttime, and as she's making her way back, that guy, the rig pig, shows up, corners her, and it's not looking good for Maya, except we gave her superpowers. Superpowers that are tied to the story. So her first one is we're going to give her taser hands. So in kind of like a reckless moment, she like tries to grab the guy by the neck, but it turns out she's got taser hands, and she zaps him. And that's when she realizes, dang, I got superpowers. So I listed a few here. Taser hands, protective shield, we'll do some infrared vision so she can see certain dangers, because that actually is super useful in a chemical plant context. What I call the hug, which is she hugs with extreme strength. So she's not super strong in every sense, but she can grip things incredibly well. And the other one is she can rapidly understand plant schematics, so you can drop her into any chemical plant and she just knows what to do. So again, goals, dreams. She wants to make as much money as possible with her work as a safety engineer. And guess what? All of these will help her. So these all help her towards her goal. And what's getting in her way is the fact that there are people pointing out your goals aren't as good as you think, but she's too proud. So we can see now a story here. Now that she's crossed the threshold, we're going to start giving her experiences to set up what will become the true conflict of the story, which is, because we're talking about female empowerment, well, guess what, right? There is more to it than just being successful in the career. We want to have this idea of like, what is the great divine feminine in totality, and she's going to achieve all of it. So that is going to be the bigger story. And on the podcast, I just threw in this random thought of like, she's out walking with her kid wanders off, and she like gets in a fight with a polar bear because the kid finds the polar bear's cub. But we can think of some event that makes her start thinking, I really am careless with my kid. Then we start to showcase more of her abilities over time, that instead of doing it all in one panel covered in armpit hair like they did in the original, we're going to have various like small accidents where she can kind of see them and sense them ahead of others, and she keeps stopping them. So it establishes what she does as a very particular safety engineer superhero, that she can see accidents, she can stop accidents. And with her protective shield, if it gets too far south, she can also protect people from some of the dangers in this situation, although she's not totally protecting. Now we're going to get to the big part, and this is where the part with the sage comes in, because he's also talking to her the whole time. We can base this off of a very classic, very tragic rig accident called Piper Alpha. And so this was an accident in the North Sea. It was the deadliest oil rig accident of all time. And without going into the details, you can see this was the rig. Back here's the accommodation block, and the helipad. This is 175 feet above the water, by the way. Here you can see where it is just exploding in flames. And when the accident was over, this piece of the drill room was all that was left. So that means everybody over here who stayed on board died as this thing burned and fell into the ocean. Those who survived managed to survive only because I believe it was one of these cranes or towers here collapsed, and you had to run down the crane through the flames to jump off the side of the rig so that you could avoid landing in the water directly below the rig, which was boiling hot, and you could land in water that was merely hot and make your way to the rescue ship. It was a true just disaster. It was a true tragedy. I'll tell you what, man, when I watch the documentary, I cry every time. It really was. So we're going to drop her in this. And what will happen is she does become friends with the sage over the course of this story. And guess what? She's in a situation that, just like this one, she's got to run the burning bridge to get into the water. She can also, with her infrared vision, see that certain parts of the water are ice cold and you can freeze to death in that Arctic water. Other areas are boiling hot. You could even show, right, if you wanted to get really gruesome with it, you could show someone jumping into that part and dying. But she realized, like, she's got to land this thing just right. And then she looks at her friend who's the sage and is like, dude, like, this is an old guy. He can't walk that fast. He's not going to make it himself. So she chooses to save him because, again, we want a hero we can root for. And as she's running the burning bridge, literally running through the fires of hell, and then as she jumps down and plunges into the water, because we can do it at night, it is black Arctic water, and there in that state of darkness, in the state of blackness, she is in the abyss. And at that moment, she asks herself, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And that is when she suddenly remembers everything that her caretaker / girlfriend and this child of hers has been telling her the whole time, which is, these are the things that really matter. And so in that abyss, it really is a death and rebirth of the character. And she realizes, you know what? I can't just make money and eat expensive food in these various cities and countries anymore. I need to do more with my life. Now we can bring in the evil CEO. Because now what he's going to do is he's going to now play on the core wound and on her flaws and say, actually, I want to send you, because you are really a hero in this story, I'm going to send you on various assignments all over the place. But what she doesn't realize is he actually has a nefarious plot for this. Maybe he's like causing accidents for insurance. Maybe he's got some other mad scheme. Maybe she knows something from that plant accident that he needs to find a way to get her killed in another accident so that she's out of the way. Or maybe by having her associated with accidents, because everywhere she shows up, something blows up, her reputation gets destroyed, right? We can think of any number of these, but we've got this. But the key is he always phrases it in terms of the core wound and in terms of the major flaws. But the difference now is, now that we're on the other side of this, she is paying more attention. Maybe if she talks to the sage more, he'll have more to say. He will talk with her child more. And what happens is she eventually gets to the point, especially with her child, that she's like, you know what? I do love you. I want to give you A, B, and C. But the child says, I want X, Y, Z. And this begins to become a revelation for her. Now, because we want some action, we continue to also tell it through the story of her going on these assignments, barely making it through, but saving the day. But as it goes on, she realizes more and more that she has kind of a complete life she needs to get to. So maybe she starts toning back on the exotic vacations. Maybe she starts making other plans. And this will kind of lead us towards a conclusion here. But now that she's learned all this, she's ready for a return. And what I show here is perhaps we can have the death of her father, so she has a reason to come back and talk to her family again. And further, she can have a reconnection with her mother, and in the same way that her child said, I want this, even though you want to give me that. And she realizes, oh, like, this conflict is really because I wanted this thing for my kid. Well, guess what? She now realizes it was the same thing with her family all along. And therefore, her parents really did love her. It's just they were loving her the only way they knew how, and it was not what she wanted or needed. And so you now have this thought of, she says, okay, now I understand what it means for kind of a new full womanhood, right? She's still strong, she's still smart, she's still confident. But she says, you know what, I need to both be this competent leader of, right, my child and this family here, but then also I have to be competent out in the work that I'm doing. So instead of saying I'm giving up one for the other, she's saying I'm becoming something greater. So that would be, if we're doing kind of a feminist female empowerment story, that's how we would do it. And I think like in the final state, she might become a professor teaching safety engineering. So that way it's kind of like she gets a safer job, right, after resolving the other plot. So again, at the beginning, she's giving her family the finger. She goes through a series of adventures where she determines what's really important in life. In so doing, she also uncovers this plot where a evil executive is somehow related to these accidents, which she uncovers. And as she does so, she's also mending her other relationships so that at the end, the bad guy is identified and defeated. The broken relationships are restored, and the hero's journey is complete. So that is the rewrite that hits all of these constraints, but actually makes a story. Now, as I wrote this, I have a thought for another story. So now we're going to jump from that to the next one. All right. So the previous story, we were really constraining ourselves to do a rewrite with Mother of Madness. So we had a particular character, particular construction, and a particular theme, right? So we had the feminist / female empowerment theme, and you kind of saw how I did that, how she becomes both a great mother and, in the end, I would say maybe a great professor, which the story kind of works, but I'm going to say if we can remove those constraints, I think I can make something a lot better. Right? We don't need to make all men the enemy. We don't need to make these characters be completely standalone. Let's have some fun with this now. So we're going to drop all the other constraints, and we're just going to have a female who's a chemical engineer with a somewhat similar backstory. And with that, I created a new character. I call her Prudhoe May, right? Based off of Prudhoe Bay. So this lady is going to be called May, and she's going to have her best friend here, Wendy. And what we're going to do is we're also, as I started developing the story, I identified a different set of themes. They're going to have a bond of sisterly friendship. So this is, right, the theme of this relationship and how it helps them. We're going to talk about the right relationship with home. They are both broken characters, and yet somehow they both help each other through the bond of sisterly friendship. And we're also going to talk about the importance of hearing and speaking the truth. So how are we going to do this? Well, we now have Prudhoe May and Watchful Wendy. So these two here. And you can already kind of see a little bit just in the character presentation that obviously May is this very strong character. And right, Wendy is a little bit weaker and kind of nervous. And just as we do this in presenting the character, it's really the case. So because we're centered on Prudhoe Bay again, May, she grew up near Houston, Texas. Once again, same story. But the difference is she's going to put up with her parents until she gets her bachelor's in chemistry. We're not doing the high school dropout thing. We're just going to skip straight to her going to Prudhoe Bay because, again, this will change the story theme. Now, for Wendy, she grew up in Wasilla, so that's a town in Alaska, and she loves her home state. In fact, she doesn't want to leave. Her dad was a safety engineer at Prudhoe Bay, so guess what? Right? They are both going to end up in the same place, but for different reasons. And in fact, her parents will be encouraging her to go out of Wasilla because they're like, she's going to become kind of a homebody. And right, because we know this type of person, right? The kind of person like they feel like they found their safe, happy place. They don't want to move. And the parents are like, no, you need some experience because like we need you to grow more. Like we need you to develop. Like don't stay in the house. And so she still doesn't want to go too far, but hey, she's like, hey, my dad did the safety engineering up in Prudhoe Bay. I could do it too. So that works, but she's still kind of a shy, nervous character, so she's easily intimidated. Whereas, as we remember from earlier, we did make Prudhoe Bay into someone who does not get intimidated at all. And so there we go, right? So we've got two very different characters with two very different goals. So Wendy again, she's like, okay, I'll go do this work. I'll get established, but like, I still want to be close to home. May still wants to be the world traveler, still wants to spite her parents. Same core issue for May. And with Wendy, because she has this strong sense of home, that is going to prevent her from acting. It's going to prevent her from taking risks. And in fact, as I was working this out, I suddenly realized something, right? Here's a great piece of dialogue right here. Wendy's here because it's home. May's here because it isn't. And that, I think, will set up a great contrast for these two characters in which they are kind of the sage and foil to each other. And so we have to think about how to put them together and then how to like make this a way that by rubbing on each other, right, kind of like hitting on each other, these two characters are going to grow because either one is strong or the other is weak. Major flaws, same as before. Wendy's flaws, she needs to feel safe and she often needs support. And so in a sense, there will become a relationship of Wendy will kind of depend on May to be the one to do the talking. And typo right there. There we go. But she does get assertive with people she's safe with, which people who know introverts or who are introverts know about this case. So again, interesting dialogue here. May still get superpowers. Wendy will not get superpowers, but she will have a nice detective mind. She pays attention to detail, and because she doesn't speak openly, she speaks quietly. So if we need someone to be out there loud and proud, May's going to do it. If we need someone to like slip somebody a note, Wendy's going to do it. Now we can add more interesting characters because we're not constrained anymore by agenda, because again, agenda prevents good story, and good story ultimately wrecks agenda. So one guy, like, I don't know why, like the name just popped in my head, John Goodman, right? Literally a good man. So in addition to the rig pigs we had before, we're going to also have good guys on the team. So John Goodman is another Texas oil field worker. He came up, and maybe he could be a love interest to one of these characters, right? So this guy shows that, hey, there are guys up in these places that they know what they're doing with their life. They've got a plan. They're executing that plan. They are great guys. So that is John Goodman. We're going to have the evil CEO again and a journalist who's going to tail him. So now we've got all the stuff these guys are going to do. And guess what? Again, basic story, we're roughing it out. I may actually want to write this one because just the characters are already interesting. And there's so many dynamics here. And what's cool is it's almost kind of like a double hero's journey as these main characters go through and do what they need to do. So again, we start off in Prudhoe Bay. Now in this case, these two get assigned to each other. Maybe they become roommates because they just want to save on rent, each for their own reason. And further, the way they start coming together is we're going to have a similar confrontation with the Rig Pig, but the difference is the Rig Pig is going to hit on Wendy, and because Wendy is a shy character and easily intimidated, she's clearly stressed as this guy is leaning on her. May intervenes, and in this case, she is not a sex worker, all right? Like, that was silly, we're throwing that part out. But she can still do some ridiculous over-the-top thing of, right, publicly embarrassing this guy. But then along the way, too, instead of the guy running off, he may actually try to double down. And when that happens, we now introduce John Goodman, who he also jumps in, kind of rescues the both of them. And now this sets up conflict, right? Because May is proud. This guy came in and upstaged her. But maybe, like, Wendy was kind of impressed by the guy. So now we've got kind of an interesting set of relationships here, that the two girls are together because they have to be. But, right, there's not necessarily enemies, but kind of a rivalry now between May and Goodman. Right, so we'll hold on to that for a minute. And furthermore, because these two girls are very different, right, they can bicker a little bit. And by the way, we haven't mentioned the single mom part. We also dropped that part too, just for story purposes. But anyway, getting back to this. But yeah, those two bicker. Right, May goes up to do the flare tower again by herself because she... because she does that for her job. But also, too, it's a chance for her to have some kind of, like, inner dialogue of, well, like, what Wendy's saying is dumb anyway. And she's still starting to having those questions. And again, right, touched by the Aurora, superpowers, right? That guy from the beginning tries to corner her, and she's like, nope, taser hands. I'm zapping you. And so now, again, a lot of this is starting to proceed the same way. But now that we have a little bit different change in the characters and the relationships, well, we've got to grow Wendy also. And so in this early stage, what happens is they're kind of the sage to each other, right? May keeps saying to Wendy, you got to be more confident. Wendy tells May, you got to be a little less reckless. And they also do notice a lot of these strange happenings and this strange increase in incidents around the rigs that they're working on and doing inspections for. But between their abilities, they start piecing stuff together. They're like, something kind of odd is going on. And they start reporting on it. Although really it's May who's doing the reporting because Wendy's too nervous, right? She's like, can you do it for me, May? And there you go. So we've now established who they are. We've now established things have kind of changed now that May has some of these interesting powers, and we can show some displays of those. Now we come again to the Abyss situation and the Piper Alpha once again. But now here's where the real change is we can give various characters their chances to be heroic. But then maybe through some accident, Wendy and May get a little bit isolated, and it's not going to be very straightforward for them to get off the rig. We have the tower collapse again. And in the middle of all these flames, in the middle of the daunting situation in front of them, Wendy totally breaks down and she screams out, I want to go home. Right? People who have been in very stressful situations, right? Like they know about, right? There are things that you say in moments of duress like that. And where this conflict comes up is again, theme, right? Theme about the right relationship with home. Right. Wendy very understandably saying, I want to go home because I don't want to burn to death on Piper Alpha. And May at that moment, she's like, I don't have a home to go to. Right. And again, that is that life perspective changing moment that happens. And again, now in this case, it's because they've got to run the burning bridge And Wendy is too terrified to do so because that is kind of a terrifying situation, right? Right. May will pick her up and carry her over that part until once again they make the daring escape. And hey, maybe with all the fire, maybe that metal's like red hot and like May's boots are melting. And instead of jumping, she's more overcome with the heat and just kind of falls off the side. And then this gives Wendy an opportunity that she sees the rescue boat and maybe like May's out of it. And she's like, man, like I've got to pull both of us to safety or like we're dying in the Arctic Ocean, right? Just extreme duress. So like they're both put under their most extreme duress. They're both questioning everything they have. Again, death and rebirth. This is the abyss. Now coming out of it, right, again, we bring in the evil CEO. And maybe not him directly, but we can also bring him in indirectly through kind of like an agent that's doing the stuff for him. But what happens is, of course, because of this experience and their safety engineers are like, why did this happen? And they're starting to realize something is not right. We may even like reveal a detail on here that something's not right. This accident was intentional. And by doing that, the sorry guys, I told you I cry every time I see that documentary. It is so tragic. It is so tragic. But I just thought about going all the way back up here, right? All the way back up here. Remember this part, Clapton Art Museum? They can be brought to New York as heroes. And we can introduce a couple of characters at this turning point where we introduce the true big bad and we introduce some of his associates. And they're actually, yeah, it's like, yeah, we're celebrating you, but actually now the plot to ruin you two begins. But here's the thing. Now they've got the big villain. But through this experience, these two have come together in an inseparable bond. And because of that, the assignments they get sent on, each one, because it becomes a chance for both of them to grow more and to address this core wound more. And so, again, May starts thinking about what she really wants to do with her life. And in Wendy's case, she realizes, like, I have to not be so nervous and not be so scared in order to do what I need to do. And I've even thought of a few possible accidents they could get thrown into. Now, this one was, of course, the Flixborough disaster, in which this entire plant got blown up along with like some of the homes nearby, because these guys tried to connect two reactors with a giant rubber gasket, and that was a really stupid idea. And maybe, hey, May, with her super grip ability, manages to hold this thing together so it doesn't detonate right away. But Wendy's got to be the one to run up to the control room and tell guys, hey guys, like shut this thing down and depressurize it right away. We're all going to die. And that can be a moment for her to face, like, dude, like I've got to get assertive or we're all going to die. So again, right, through these accidents, it's no longer just action for no reason. It's action that makes the person face the darkest parts of themselves and say, you don't define me anymore. And so that allows, even though Wendy has no superpowers, she is truly heroic. And by going through a series of these accidents now, they can uncover the plot, work with our journalist to create an epic story, and the resolution of which is something actually I don't want to talk about too much, because you know what, I may actually make this story. You know, I like this story. Right? Because the thing is, again, you remove the constraints, you get a better story. So I'm just thinking about, like, man, like how could they really catch the big bad in a way that's convincing? What could be the kind of like final fates? Who are the love interests? We could actually put some really interesting things together here. And I'm even thinking about, right, it could conclude in Wendy's case of Wendy giving the epic speech that she would have never had confidence to give before as kind of like her heroic conclusion. Um, we can think of some kind of like heroic final fights that May can get into, or even like May and Goodman get their kind of like get their rivalry healed and they do something together. Right, there's a lot of potential for how we could do this return. But the key is that instead of it just being these people saying, "Hey, look at me. I am interesting. I'm smart. I'm cultured." It's like, "Hey, let's start with some actual issues. We're going to resolve those issues and we're going to do it through a heroic tale." But the thing is, every single step of the way comes back to the themes and comes back to these characters determining their starter goals versus their ultimate goals. And then further, the fact that they have to regularly face their core issues and their major flaws, and that the villains not only try to get them in the typical sense, but also they try to get them by identifying those flaws and trying to support and trying to exploit them. So again, I think this would actually be a really fun one. We can call this the Maidens of Mayhem, and we can totally subvert the expectations of the original book by writing a totally new book that could actually be interesting. And I'll tell you what, guys, what do you think about this? If you like it, I'll go for it. And but with that in mind, I think we've built this story about as much as I want to build it for a podcast episode. So thank you for taking the time to listen, and I look forward to future episodes with you guys.